Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. I hope you enjoyed lunch, and I think the question is a good one right after lunch. For example, as you're in Munich, you see that many more bikes are on the streets versus maybe a couple of years ago. So that gives you already an indication that bikes are increasing and the traffic with bikes are increasing. Consumers are using bikes. Essentially, this revolution of e-bikes, the revolution of e-mobility, is not so much about cars, but it's really about bikes and e-bikes. And the question who's winning, we will see, but certainly bikes are. You see that 10 million cars roughly have been sold, and out of that about 20% were e-cars, right? That was 2022. More than double, or almost double, have been sold in terms of bikes. It's even higher. You see that almost 3 million cars have been sold, but almost double, almost 5 million units of bikes have been sold, and more than 50, almost 50% of those have been e-bikes. So you see in volume, I think is round one for bikes. Now, if you look into the bikes if you look into the bikes and look into the different categories of bikes, there are certainly bikes that you all know that you use for recreational purposes. The mountain bikes have been sold tremendously last year. These are German numbers, and the share of e-bikes or e-mobility in mountain bikes is almost 90%. So it's a huge change of consumers over to the transportational side. And you see city bikes and especially cargo bikes. First of all, growing quite a lot, especially cargo bikes. Those are these big bikes that you can carry kids in safely, or you see that the CAGR, that's the small number there, 45% from 2019 to 22 has been 45%. So tremendous growth of those. Almost 6% of all cars sold by now are cargo bikes. For recreational purposes are going into e-bike, but also bikes, specific types of bikes that replace cars more and more are to the majority, enabled with e-mobility. Do your shopping or to go in the city or carry your groceries. There's a couple of very clear reasons, and I'm sure you're familiar with those as well. First of all, it's obviously about sustainability. It's a big, massive mega trend, we call this, right? In consumer behavior, that people pay more and more attention. How is the impact of the things I do for the planet, for Earth? And obviously, driving a bike or riding an e-bike is much better from a sustainability perspective, from a carbon emission perspective and so on, than driving a car or even an e-car. So there's a big plus here to switch from cars to bike from that perspective. But not just that, also if you look at cost, obviously these times, is tough times for many consumers. They have to look, to save cost, to maintain and to repair and to basically have and own insurance of a bike is much purpose. You're more to the city, there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of traffic jams, and you are getting frustrated, annoyed, but not least, obviously we all, I think, many consumers at least are into health and health aspects. So they want to live a healthy life. It's also a big mega trend in consumers, and cars to bikes, specifically with e-bikes because it's so convenient. Now, if you take this a step forward and say, this is all good, but what does it mean for the future? Has that been it? I mean, is that now all? Everybody has one for a bike, and how likely is it? And 85% of the consumers said, yes, I would. Almost 30%, 27% say, I would for most of the purposes to have a car, so for pretty much completely switch to a bike. And 57% say, well, for parts at least, I would switch to a bike. So 85% are willing to do this big switch. And that eventually drives the future sales as well. So not just 22, when we already saw almost twice as many e-bikes sold versus e-cars, but that continues, and the acceleration will actually go on. So higher growth rates in e-bikes, which will lead in 2030 towards the projections that we actually have a 3x number of e-bikes sold versus a 2.5x number of e-cars sold. So I know this fair is all about cars and e-cars, but actually that's wrong. E-bikes is the much more important vehicle for consumers in the future. Now, what does it mean for the people in the industry, for the stakeholders in the car industry? Is everybody now going bike, or will they all stick cars? Of course not. They all stick cars, but you have e-bikes. So there's a switch coming up, but there's also other players around this. You might be familiar with the ADAC. That's a German club, officially, for road services. It's the biggest road service club in Europe, more than 20 million members. Cars, I used to have these yellow cars driving around if you have some kind of a service need on the Autobahn or somewhere else, if you're a member. So that club, it's a very traditional car industry or car club, right, that used to lobby a lot for the car industry, is switching. So they have now bike services under their service umbrella, and they also use bikes to service cars or to service bikes. So there's a big switch coming already now in some of the large constituents and stakeholders of the ex-car industry, or car-only industry, let's say. And then if you move on to services, right? ATU, you might know that is the biggest repair service chain in Germany, about 500 or more than 500 repair shops across Germany. They are now partnering with us as a company, bikes as well, e-bikes as well. Because obviously if you have an e-bike, you need repair services, and where do you go? Maybe to, in the future, an ATU shop where you used to go with your car. So there's first pilots, it's all early days for that, but first pilot and address this trend that consumers want to switch to bikes and e-bikes. Now last but not least, who are we? Who are Signa Sports United? You might not be familiar with us as a company. We are one of the largest e-commerce on our websites, more than 300 million visits in a year, 2022, drive more than $1 billion of revenues across our different web shops, and 60% of those revenues are in bike. So our biggest category in sports is the bike category. That's why we care so much for that. Within bike, we have various web shops. One is, for example, Fahrrad.de here in Germany. You might be familiar with. Fahrrad means bike in German. So that's a very, very important domain here as one of the web shops. Or Bikester, those domains and those web shops address the mass market or the mobility market when you commute, when you need a city or a cargo bike, for example. And then we also have particular web shops for the recreation area where if you're an expert or an enthusiast for bikes, you would buy Pro Bike. It's one of the oldest road bike shop brand in Germany, for example. So that's us in a nutshell. And obviously, we do sell e-bikes quite a lot, and we connect as well with the offline stores. So we are in position with them, more than 500 shops connect with us and do services for our customers, and we deliver goods for these bike shops. So we call this connected retail. So we're connecting, if you wish, the online and the offline world here for our own. So that's in a nutshell who we are. And with all of those propositions in the bike industry, we are actually at the heart of this revolution. And this revolution, that's the main thesis here. We're right in there. We're right in this revolution. It's already happening, and you see in the numbers, bikes are overtaking cars in a big way. And with that, my small little keynote is over. Thank you very much for your attention. And